Hello everyone, welcome to the presentation by Zhejiang from UNSW on the topic of hydro-climatological forecasting, a view from the spectral domain. So, why we are interested in the spectral domain or the frequency domain? Well, first, let's look at the question, do we need transformation in predictor variables? Here is an example of a scatter plot between discharge and total dissolved solids concentrations. There is no clear linear relationship between them. How about now? After the transformation of discharge using the natural log, we observe that approximate linearity is more or less achieved. The accuracy of the response, here, TDS, will be improved by using the transformed discharge. So the answer to the question is yes, we do need transformation in predictor variables, in some cases, or lots of cases in hydrology. However, the question authors are interested here is that, do we need transformation in the frequency domain as well? We think the answer is yes, and we propose the following hypothesis. If the spectrum of the predictor is similar to response, the predictive model exhibits better accuracy than otherwise. So the question comes first is how to characterize the spectral domain before we try to refine predictor spectral representation. There are many ways can be used to characterize the frequency domain, and here we adopt the wavelets transform. Before I go to the detail of our method, let me introduce some background of wavelets transform. The data we have are often discretely sampled, and thus we use discrete wavelets transform, for short, DWT. One of the decomposition DWT leads to is so-called multi-resolution analysis, for short, MRA. So using DWT MRA, we can simply decompose a time series here, X, into a group of subtime series, and there are two main characteristics. First, when summing all these subtime series together, it equals to the original time series. Secondly, their variants are also additive, which means when we add their variants together, it also equals to the variance of original time series. For example, we have a predictor variable x here, which is the equivalent potential temperature. As we can see, it shows quite smooth and periodical patterns. Wavelets is then used to decompose the original time series into subtime series. From fine-scale information, represents fast-changing high-frequency details, to large-scale information represents slowly changing low-frequency approximation. It's worth noting that most of the information or variance concentrates at level 3. So if we plot the distribution of variance by percentage among these levels, you will see more clearly which level has a higher variance. Just now, we have seen the predictor variable x, and now I'm going to present our target response y, which we use a drought index, standardized precipitation index. For SPI, after applying wavelets transform, most of the information or variance concentrates at low frequency levels. So, similarly, if we show their variance distribution in the spectrum, you will see that they have completely different patterns. So, the main message here is that they have shown remarkably different spectrum properties, and our target is to find the variance transformed predictor, which has a similar spectrum with the associated response. What we are going to propose next is an optimal variance transformation, and the transformed predictor can explain maximum information in the corresponding response in a regression setting. So, how this can be done? Basically, we need to change predictor x to x dash such that x dash has a closer spectral representation to the response y. What authors have found is that the variance in the spectrum of predictor x is to be redistributed according to this alpha, which is a function of covariance C, between predictor's wavelets decompositions R and the response Y. In the end, we can obtain the minimized RMSE using the transform predictor X dash. And if you are interested in mathematical derivations, you can find more details in our published manuscript at Water Resources Research as a technical note. So, how does it look like after variance transformation? Here is the transform time series in the frequency domain and time domain. Just to note that the green ones are variance distribution and signal before transformation. Well, how to apply the proposed method in practice? We propose the following prediction framework for our wavelet-based method. First, we need to identify significant drivers from a range of predictor variables. Second, form a predictive model and estimate model parameters. Lastly, target response is predicted when new inputs come in. What's our contribution here is to use variance transformed predictor variables to carry out all the processes shown above, and they can be casted into following two equations easily. Now, it's time to look at some examples. We have tested our hypothesis with both synthetic and real examples. First, let's look at a synthetic example. It is a nonlinear example generated from Rosler system with chaotic dynamics. Well, in this case, we have used X and Y to predict Z, including the scenarios using both transformed and untransformed predictor X and Y. A realization of the dataset with 1,000 samples is shown here. By our visual check, it is clear that predictors and response have completely different spectrum properties. So, what is the performance of our model against the reference model? First of all, the experiment is carried out with both calibration and validation. Basically, we have divided the data sets into two equal subsets. The first subset is used for calibration, shown in the figure panel A, while the second half is used for validation, shown in the figure panel B. We have assessed the model performance using three metrics. Results of our model show consistent low RMSE and high correlation with closer standard deviation to observations in both calibration and validation. A real case is also presented here to demonstrate our hypothesis. It is an application to downscaling drought index (SPI) across the Sydney region, Australia, including 15 stations in total. The study period is from 1950 to 2009, 60 years in total. And we adopt two-fold cross-validation. Therefore, the results we presented hereafter are cross-validated results for the entire period. The predictor variables used in this study include 7 large-scale atmospheric variables, and they are listed in the table here, including geopotential heights, temperature, wind, and pressure-related variables. A closer look at the predictors and response is given as well. So, on the left side is 7 atmospheric variables, averaged over this region, while on the right side, it shows rainfall and rainfall-derived SPI at one sampled location. To assess the performance of our model, first, let's look at the simulated response against observations for both models at one sampled location. It is evident that the model using transform predictors outperforms the reference model. In details, we summarize the reductions in RMSE using the bar plot across all 15 stations. All the stations investigated have shown significant improvements. Another metric we have assessed is the PDF scale scores. Basically, it is measured by overlapping area of their density curves. Again, it clearly shows that our model performs better than the model using untransformed predictors. So far, we have shown proofs that the hypothesis is indeed valid, and now it's time to wrap up. First, a unique variance transformation is identified for each predictor variable, which can explain maximum information in the response. Second, results of the synthetic and real case example show clear improvements in predictability compared to the use of untransformed predictors. Last, it is a generic method and not limited to hydro-climatological system. Again, there are much more details you can find in the published manuscript. However, in this work, there is an issue need to be addressed before it can be used for forecasting in practice, without dependence on the model simulations, where we know the future information of predictor variables. This problem actually arises from the mathematical basis of a discrete wavelet transform, where it requires future information in the decomposition. For example, we have a signal along the timeline, and t is the present. When we calculate the decomposed time series at any given time step, it needs the information from the past, the current, and the future. However, in reality, the future information is not available. There is not much we can do about it. So, can we generalize this method to also apply in a forecasting context? The answer is yes. There are classes of wavelets that can allow for this. Those do not depend on the future information. And we have included this in our another paper at Environmental Modeling and Software. It also comes with an open source R package. I will give the link where you can download it free. Here it is. Anyone can access our hydrology group website at the University of New South Wales. This developed package is named as Wavelet System Prediction, for short WASP, and it can be directly downloaded from this link as well. Another thing to mention is that our group has lots of open source data sets and tools available online. The highlighted one at the bottom is the software for identifying significant predictor variables. The part I haven't covered in my presentation, but it is a very important part of the proposed method. If you are interested in our works, please go ahead and have a look, or drop us an email. We would love to hear your feedback. Thank you for listening, and you can find my email address here.